The sound of my phone hitting the hardwood floor echoed through Carol Thompson's pristine dining room like a gunshot. 12 faces stared at the shattered screen, then at my husband Kevin, then at me. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity while the scent of turkey and sage hung heavy in the air, mixing with the tension that had been building all evening. "Now look what you made me do," Kevin said, his voice carrying that particular blend of irritation and condescension I'd grown to recognize over the past 3 years. "Maybe if you weren't glued to that thing every 5 minutes, we could have a normal family dinner." I stared down at my phone, its screen spiderwebbed beyond repair, knowing that inside its broken memory lay evidence that would change everything. Evidence I'd been gathering for weeks, evidence that Kevin's family had no idea I possessed. As I knelt to pick up the pieces, I felt something shift inside me, a cold clarity replacing the shock. When I stood up, I looked directly into Kevin's eyes and said the words that would begin the unraveling of everything he thought he knew about his wife. "You have no idea what you just did." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Jessica Martinez Thompson, though these days I'm seriously reconsidering that hyphenated last name. 3 years ago, I was Jessica Martinez, a 28-year-old financial analyst who had just landed the promotion of a lifetime at Pinnacle Investment Group in downtown Denver. I had my own corner office on the 32nd floor, with breathtaking views of the Rocky Mountains, a salary that made my immigrant parents weep with pride, and a reputation for being able to spot financial irregularities that others missed. I was the first person in my family to graduate college, let alone earn an MBA, and I'd done it all while working 2 jobs and sending money home to help my younger sister finish high school. That's the woman Kevin Thompson fell in love with, or so he claimed. We met at a charity fundraiser where my company was a major sponsor, one of those glittering Denver events where old money mixed with new money, and everyone pretended their donations were purely altruistic. Kevin was charming in an effortless way that only comes from a lifetime of financial security. Tall, blonde, with the kind of easy confidence that made conversations flow like wine. He was genuinely interested in my work, asking thoughtful questions about market analysis and nodding appreciatively when I explained complex financial instruments. After years of dating men who either felt intimidated by my success or tried to compete with it, Kevin's comfortable acceptance felt like a revelation. The Thompson family welcomed me initially, though I realize now it was with the patronizing warmth reserved for temporary diversions. Kevin's mother, Carol, was all smiles and compliments during our first dinner together at their sprawling Cherry Hills Village mansion, praising my lovely accent and asking if I missed Mexican food, apparently unaware that I was born in Denver and my family had been in Colorado for 3 generations. Frank, Kevin's father, was more direct in his approval, telling Kevin within my hearing that I seemed like a smart girl who knows her place. I should have paid more attention to that phrase. Kevin proposed after 18 months of dating, on a ski slope in Aspen at the family cabin during what would become my introduction to Thompson family traditions. The ring was beautiful, a vintage piece that had belonged to Kevin's grandmother, and I was touched that Carol had offered it. Later, I would learn it was because they assumed our marriage would be temporary and wanted to keep the family heirloom within easy retrieval distance. The wedding was elegant but not extravagant, held at the Denver Country Club with 200 guests, most of whom I'd never met. My family felt overwhelmed by the grandeur, while Kevin's family treated the entire event as a minor inconvenience. During the reception, I overheard Carol telling her sister Ruth that she was sure I was a lovely girl who would figure things out eventually. I was too happy to ask what exactly I was supposed to figure out. Our first year of marriage passed smoothly enough. We bought a modern townhouse in Lodo, splitting the mortgage payment equally despite Kevin's subtle suggestions that I might want to consider a less demanding position now that I was a married woman. I loved our home, loved the way the morning light streamed through our floor-to-ceiling windows, loved hosting dinner parties where I could show off both my cooking skills and the financial knowledge that impressed Kevin's friends from the construction company. Thompson Construction was a family business started by Kevin's grandfather, expanded by his father Frank, and now managed by a combination of family members and longtime employees. Kevin handled marketing and client relations while his brother Brian managed operations. It was successful enough to maintain the family's upper-middle-class lifestyle, but I began to notice certain inconsistencies during family gatherings when conversation turned to business. The first red flag came during our second Christmas as a married couple. Frank was complaining about cash flow issues, lamenting how construction companies always struggled with seasonal fluctuations. Yet just weeks earlier, Carol had been planning an elaborate kitchen renovation and discussing a potential expansion of the Aspen cabin. As someone who analyzed business finances for a living, the numbers didn't add up, but I kept my observations to myself. Kevin had made it clear that Thompson Construction business was family business, and despite our marriage, I wasn't quite family in that sense. The pressure for me to scale back my career began subtly. Carol would make offhand comments about how exhausted I looked, suggesting that perhaps I was working too hard. Kevin started declining invitations to work events, claiming that mixing business with our personal life made him uncomfortable. When I received another promotion 6 months later, becoming the youngest senior analyst in Pinnacle's history, the congratulations from his family felt forced. "Don't you think it's time to start thinking about other priorities?" Carol asked during a family barbecue, her hand resting meaningfully on her daughter Amanda's growing belly. Amanda was pregnant with her second child, having left her teaching career after her first pregnancy to focus on what really matters. The implication was clear, though I chose to ignore it at the time. Kevin's attitude toward my work began to shift as my responsibilities increased. What had once been pride in my accomplishments transformed into resentment about my schedule. He complained when I had to work late, even though his own schedule was erratic due to construction deadlines. He started making jokes about my fancy job and big city salary that felt less affectionate and more cutting as time passed. The breaking point began building 2 months before that disastrous Thanksgiving dinner. I'd been assigned to lead a major analysis of mid-sized construction companies for a potential investment portfolio. It was a prestigious project that could lead to a partnership track position, the kind of opportunity that comes once in a career. As I dove into the research, I began to notice patterns that troubled me professionally and personally. Construction companies, I learned, were notorious for financial irregularities. Cash businesses, subcontractor relationships, and complex project financing created numerous opportunities for creative accounting. As I analyzed industry trends and risk factors, I couldn't help but think about Thompson Construction and some of the conversations I'd overheard during family gatherings. My professional curiosity got the better of me. Using public records and industry databases available through my work, I began researching Thompson Construction's financial history. What I found made my stomach turn. The company had been taking on increasingly risky projects, leveraging assets beyond reasonable limits, and showing revenue fluctuations that suggested either incredible incompetence or deliberate manipulation. I tried to discuss my concerns with Kevin, framing them as general industry observations rather than specific accusations about his family's business. His reaction was immediate and hostile. How dare I use my position to spy on his family? Didn't I understand the concept of loyalty? Was my job more important than our marriage? That last question hung between us for weeks. I began to realize that in Kevin's mind, and likely his family's mind, the answer was supposed to be obvious. Of course my job wasn't more important than our marriage. Of course I should prioritize family over career. Of course I should trust his family's business practices without question. But I couldn't shake what I'd discovered, especially when I realized that Thompson Construction was being considered for inclusion in the very investment portfolio I was analyzing. The conflict of interest was staggering, but more than that, I couldn't recommend an investment in a company that showed every sign of financial instability, family connection or not. I made the decision to recuse myself from that portion of the analysis, citing a potential conflict of interest to my supervisor. It was the ethical thing to do, but it also meant explaining my marriage connection to a company that was looking increasingly risky. My supervisor appreciated my honesty and assigned that segment to another analyst, but I could see the questions in her eyes. Kevin's reaction when I told him about my recusal was explosive. He accused me of trying to sabotage his family's business, of being ungrateful for everything they'd done for me, of prioritizing my career over our marriage. The fight lasted hours, with Kevin alternating between accusations and appeals to my loyalty. Finally, exhausted, I agreed to his demand that I not discuss Thompson Construction with anyone at work. It was a promise I would soon regret making. The weeks leading up to Thanksgiving were tense. Kevin seemed to be watching my every move, questioning my work schedule more closely than ever before. He started insisting on family dinners at his parents' house multiple times per week, claiming his mother needed extra help planning the holiday meal. These dinners became increasingly uncomfortable as the family's comments about my work grew more pointed. "Jessica works so hard," Carol would say with a concerned expression. "I worry she's missing out on the important things in life." Frank would nod gravely, adding that successful marriages required sacrifice and compromise. Amanda, now heavily pregnant with her third child, would share stories about how much happier she'd become after leaving her teaching career, how fulfilling it was to focus entirely on family. The messaging was consistent and unsubtle. My career was a problem that needed to be solved. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, Kevin presented me with what he called a proposal. He'd been thinking about our future, about starting a family, about the kind of life we wanted to build together. Wouldn't it make sense for me to consider transitioning away from the demanding world of financial analysis? Thompson Construction was expanding, and they could use someone with my skills in a more family-friendly role. I could work part-time, set my own schedule, and still contribute financially while having time for the children we'd eventually have. I listened to his entire presentation, recognizing the careful preparation behind it. This wasn't a spontaneous suggestion. This was a coordinated campaign. When he finished, I asked a single question that seemed to catch him off guard. "What's the real reason you want me to quit Pinnacle?" His hesitation told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about starting a family or achieving work-life balance. This was about removing me from a position where I might discover something they didn't want discovered. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I began documenting every conversation, every family dinner comment, every pressure tactic. I used my phone to record Kevin's increasingly aggressive attempts to convince me to quit my job. I photographed financial documents he left carelessly around our house. I started building a case, though I wasn't entirely sure what I was building it for. The final piece of the puzzle came 3 days before Thanksgiving. Kevin's laptop was open on our kitchen counter, and I glimpsed an email thread that made my blood run cold. The subject line read, "Jessica situation, urgent family meeting." The sender was his brother Brian, and the visible portion of the message mentioned potential exposure and need to accelerate timeline. I memorized the email thread identifier and accessed it later through Kevin's often used passwords. What I found was a months-long discussion between Kevin, Brian, Frank, and even Carol about the problem of my position at Pinnacle. They knew about my recusal from the Thompson Construction analysis. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They knew that other analysts would now be looking at their company. They knew that my continued employment at a firm that specialized in investment analysis posed a threat to whatever they were hiding. The emails revealed a coordinated plan to pressure me into quitting my job starting with family pressure and escalating to more direct methods if necessary. Kevin had been assigned the task of convincing me to leave Pinnacle voluntarily. If that failed, they had discussed other options, including forcing a choice between my career and my marriage. But the most damning discovery was a series of financial documents attached to one of Brian's emails. Thompson Construction wasn't just facing cash flow problems, they were actively engaged in fraudulent billing practices with several major clients. They were inflating costs, billing for materials never purchased, and creating fictitious subcontractor expenses. The scheme was sophisticated and involved multiple family members, but it was also unsustainable and increasingly risky. They needed me out of Pinnacle before someone else discovered what I had stumbled upon. As I sat in our bedroom that night, reading through months of calculated deception, I felt something crystallize inside me. These people had welcomed me into their family with smiles and wedding gifts, all while planning to neutralize me the moment I became inconvenient. Kevin, the man I'd married and trusted, had been manipulating me for months, following a script written by his family. I transferred all the evidence to a secure cloud storage account and prepared for what I knew would be the confrontation of my life. Thanksgiving dinner at the Thompson mansion would be more than a family gathering. It would be my moment to choose between the comfortable lie of acceptance and the difficult truth of standing up for myself. I chose truth. The morning of Thanksgiving, I dressed carefully in a burgundy dress that Carol had complimented during our engagement photos, styled my hair in the elegant updo she'd suggested for family photos, and wore the pearl earrings Kevin had given me for our first anniversary. I looked like the perfect daughter-in-law, the grateful wife who knew her place in the family hierarchy. But in my purse, I carried the phone that contained months of evidence, and in my heart, I carried the knowledge that this would be the last Thanksgiving I would spend pretending to be someone I wasn't. As we drove through the tree-lined streets of Cherry Hills Village toward the Thompson mansion, Kevin chatted nervously about the family members who would be attending, the menu Carol had planned, and his hope that we could have a nice, peaceful dinner without any work talk. His hand rested on my knee, a gesture that once felt affectionate but now felt possessive. I smiled and nodded and played my part perfectly, knowing that in a few hours, the careful facade we'd all been maintaining would shatter as completely as my phone screen would. The stage was set, the players were assembled, and Jessica Martinez Thompson was about to remind everyone exactly who she really was. The Thompson mansion stood like a monument to generational wealth, its colonial facade gleaming white against the backdrop of snow-dusted pine trees. As Kevin pulled our BMW into the circular driveway, I counted the cars already present. Amanda and Greg's Escalade, Brian and Nicole's Range Rover, Uncle Paul and Aunt Ruth's Mercedes sedan. The entire clan had assembled for what they believed would be a routine family gathering, complete with their annual tradition of subtly pressuring the outsider to fall in line. I adjusted my pearl earrings one final time, checking my reflection in the passenger mirror. The woman staring back at me looked composed, elegant, every inch the successful daughter-in-law Carol had spent 3 years trying to mold me into. But behind my carefully applied makeup, my mind was calculating trajectories and consequences like the financial models I built at work, variables, risk assessments, projected outcomes. Kevin's hand found mine as we walked toward the imposing front door. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice carrying that particular warmth he reserved for public moments. "Mom's going to love that dress." I squeezed his fingers gently, marveling at how natural the gesture felt, even as I knew it might be one of the last times I would touch my husband with anything resembling affection. Carol answered the door herself, resplendent in cream-colored silk that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her embrace enveloped me in expensive perfume, and the kind of practiced warmth that came from years of hosting charity events and society gatherings. "Jessica, darling, you look absolutely radiant. That color is perfect on you." She held me at arm's length, studying my face with the intensity of a jeweler examining a potentially flawed stone. Though you do look a bit tired. Have you been working too much again? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications. Before I could respond, Frank appeared behind his wife, his bulky frame filling the doorway. He pulled me into one of his bone-crushing hugs, the kind that always made me feel like a child being greeted by an overly affectionate uncle. "There's our favorite analyst," he boomed, his voice carrying the hearty confidence of a man who had never questioned his place in the world. "Hope you're ready to eat. Carol's outdone herself this year." As we stepped into the foyer, the familiar symphony of Thompson family chaos washed over me. Amanda's voice carried from the kitchen, discussing pediatrician appointments and preschool applications with someone on her phone. Brian's laugh echoed from the living room, where he was undoubtedly holding court with some story about construction site mishaps. The house smelled of turkey and sage, cinnamon and nutmeg, the comforting aromas of a holiday meal prepared by someone who had never had to worry about grocery budgets or meal planning around work schedules. Nicole appeared at the top of the curved staircase, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite spending the morning chasing after her 2 young sons. "Jess, thank goodness you're here. I need someone sane to talk to before I lose my mind completely." She descended the stairs with the practiced grace of someone who had grown up in houses like this, her cashmere sweater and designer jeans making my own carefully chosen outfit seem slightly pedestrian by comparison. I accepted her air kisses and listened to her animated description of the morning's chaos, her son's sugar-fueled rampage through Carol's immaculate house, her frustration with finding reliable childcare for the upcoming holiday parties. Nicole had never worked outside the home, having married Brian straight out of college and immediately settled into the role of stay-at-home wife with an enthusiasm that never failed to mystify me. She spoke about domestic challenges with the same intensity I brought to quarterly reports, as if managing household staff and social calendars required the same analytical skills as portfolio management. Brian emerged from the living room carrying his youngest son, 2-year-old Michael, who was sticky with what appeared to be cranberry sauce and thoroughly pleased with himself. "Jessica, come settle an argument for us. Paul insists that the Broncos have a shot at the playoffs this year, but anyone with eyes can see they're done for the season." He shifted Michael to his hip, completely unbothered by the small handprints now decorating his expensive sweater. Uncle Paul's indignant response carried from the other room, followed by good-natured laughter from the assembled men. This was Thompson family tradition in action, the comfortable banter of people who had gathered in this same house for dozens of holidays, secure in their relationships and their shared understanding of how the world worked. For 3 years, I had tried to find my place in this choreographed dance, learning the rhythms and inside jokes, memorizing the family stories and traditions. Today, I watched it all with the detached interest of an anthropologist studying a foreign culture. Amanda appeared from the kitchen, her pregnancy making her movements careful and deliberate. At 8 months along, she radiated the kind of glowing contentment that comes from doing exactly what society expects of you and being celebrated for it. She had been the golden child even before marriage and motherhood, the daughter who had chosen teaching because it was appropriately feminine and family-friendly, who had married her college boyfriend in a ceremony that made the society pages, who had produced grandchildren on schedule and retreated gracefully from any career ambitions that might complicate family dynamics. "Oh, good, you're here," she said, accepting my hug with the careful positioning of someone carrying precious cargo. "I was just telling Mom that we need to start thinking about Christmas arrangements. With the new baby coming in January, I want everything planned out well in advance." She placed her hand on her rounded belly with the unconscious pride of someone who had never questioned whether motherhood was the right choice for her. Carol's voice drifted from the kitchen, where she was orchestrating the final preparations with the precision of a military commander. The family employed a catering service for major holidays, but Carol insisted on supervising every detail personally, as if delegating completely would somehow diminish her role as the family matriarch. I could hear her directing the placement of serving dishes, adjusting seasoning levels, and confirming timing for each course. Kevin's hand settled on the small of my back, guiding me toward the living room where the men had congregated around Frank's oversized television. The Thanksgiving Day football game provided background noise for their conversation, though none of them seemed particularly invested in the outcome. Frank held court from his leather recliner, a position that allowed him to survey his assembled family with the satisfaction of a king reviewing his subjects. "Jessica, come tell Paul he's crazy about the construction market," Frank called out as we entered the room. "You deal with investment analysis all day. Surely you can explain to him why we're positioned for growth despite what the economic indicators might suggest." The room fell silent in that particular way that signals a conversational landmine. Every person present knew that my work at Pinnacle had become a source of family tension. Yet here was Frank, deliberately steering the conversation toward exactly the topic they all wanted me to avoid. I could feel Kevin's tension through his fingertips against my back, sense his internal debate about whether to deflect or let the moment play out. I smiled with the practiced ease of someone who had spent years navigating professional presentations. "The construction market is certainly complex right now. There are a lot of variables affecting growth projections, particularly for smaller to mid-sized companies." I kept my voice neutral, professional, giving nothing away while technically answering his question. Paul leaned forward in his chair. His interest clearly piqued. "But surely family businesses have advantages in uncertain markets. More flexibility, faster decision-making, stronger relationships with long-term clients." He gestured toward Brian, who was attempting to clean cranberry sauce from his son's face while listening to our conversation. "Family businesses definitely have unique characteristics," I agreed, my training in diplomatic corporate communication serving me well. "Though they also face specific challenges around governance and financial transparency that larger publicly traded companies don't encounter." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Frank's expression shifted subtly, his jovial host demeanor taking on an edge that I had rarely seen directed at me personally. Kevin's fingers pressed more firmly against my spine, a warning that I was approaching dangerous territory. Brian set Michael down and straightened, his casual demeanor sharpening into something more focused. "Transparency isn't really an issue when everyone's working toward the same goals. We don't need outside oversight to tell us how to run a business our grandfather built." His tone carried the defensiveness of someone who had spent his entire adult life being told he was carrying on a proud family legacy. "Of course not," I replied smoothly. "I was speaking generally about industry trends, not about any specific company." The lie came easily, professionally packaged and delivered with just the right amount of deference to avoid escalating the tension further. Carol's voice cut through the awkward silence from the kitchen doorway. "Dinner is ready. Everyone wash up and find your seats." Her timing was impeccable, whether by accident or design, creating a natural break in a conversation that had been heading toward uncomfortable territory. The dining room looked like a spread from a lifestyle magazine, the mahogany table extended to its full length, and dressed in Carol's best china and crystal. Autumn-themed centerpieces marched down the center of the table, interspersed with expensive candles that cast everything in a warm golden glow. Place cards marked each seat with Carol's distinctive calligraphy, and I noticed mine positioned between Kevin and Aunt Ruth, safely away from the men's end of the table where business discussions typically continued throughout the meal. As everyone settled into their assigned seats, I found myself observing the family dynamics with new clarity. The seating arrangement wasn't random. It was a carefully orchestrated hierarchy that reflected relationships and power structures. Frank at the head of the table, Carol at the foot, their children and spouses arranged by birth order and marital status. The grandchildren had their own small table nearby, supervised by a hired babysitter who would ensure they didn't disrupt the adult conversation. Brian offered to say grace, a tradition that had surprised me during my first Thompson family dinner. Despite their wealth and sophistication, The family maintained certain conservative traditions that spoke to their Midwestern roots and generational values. As we bowed our heads, I found myself thinking about my own family's Thanksgiving celebration, happening simultaneously across town. My parents, my sister Maria and her husband, my teenage nephew who was probably annoyed at being separated from his phone for the duration of the meal. A smaller gathering, less formal, but infinitely more genuine in its affection and acceptance. The first course arrived with the efficiency of professional catering. Butternut squash soup served in Carol's wedding china with homemade rosemary bread that filled the dining room with warm, yeasty aromas. Conversation flowed around safe topics: Amanda's pregnancy, Nicole's children, upcoming holiday parties, vacation plans for the new year. I participated when directly addressed, offered appropriate comments and questions, played my part in the family theater with the skill of someone who had been rehearsing the role for 3 years. But underneath the surface pleasantries, I could sense the undercurrents of tension. Kevin kept glancing at me when he thought I wasn't looking, his expression mixing affection with something that looked suspiciously like anxiety. Brian was unusually quiet, responding to direct questions but not initiating conversation with his typical enthusiasm. Even Frank seemed subdued, his usual dominance of dinner table discussion replaced by careful attention to the women's conversation about holiday preparations. As the main course was served, Carol launched into what I recognized as a carefully prepared speech about family traditions and gratitude. She spoke about the importance of prioritizing relationships over individual ambitions, about the satisfaction that comes from building something lasting together, about the wisdom of previous generations who understood what truly mattered in life. Her words were directed at the table generally, but I felt the weight of her attention like a spotlight. "Family is everything," she concluded, raising her wine glass in a toast. "Without the people who love us unconditionally, all our individual achievements are ultimately meaningless." The toast was echoed around the table, crystal glasses chiming together in a sound that should have been celebratory, but felt ominous instead. As I brought my glass to my lips, my phone buzzed in my purse with a work notification. The sound was subtle, barely audible above the dinner conversation, but Kevin's reaction was immediate and sharp. "Can't you turn that thing off for one dinner?" he asked, his voice carrying an edge of irritation that seemed disproportionate to the minor interruption. "We're trying to have a family meal here." The table fell silent again, all eyes turning toward me with expressions ranging from sympathetic understanding to barely concealed annoyance. I had committed the social sin of allowing work to intrude on family time, violating the unspoken rule that Thompson family gatherings took precedence over all outside obligations. "Sorry," I murmured, reaching into my purse to silence the device. I forgot to switch it to silent mode. But Frank leaned forward, his expression showing what looked like genuine curiosity. "Actually, I'm interested in what's so urgent at Pinnacle that it can't wait until Monday. You financial types are always so connected to your work." His tone was friendly, conversational, but something about his eyes suggested this was more than casual interest. I hesitated, my fingers finding my phone in my purse. The notification was from my supervisor, probably a routine message about market reports or client updates. Nothing that couldn't wait until Monday morning. But the way Frank was watching me, the way the entire table had suddenly focused on this minor moment, made me realize this was another test, another opportunity for the family to demonstrate the inappropriateness of my career priorities. "It's probably nothing urgent," I said finally. "Just routine work communication that can definitely wait." Kevin's hand found mine under the table, squeezing gently in what should have been a gesture of support, but felt more like a restraint. "That's the problem with these high-pressure jobs," he said, addressing his comment to the table rather than to me directly. "They make everything seem urgent even when it's not. It's hard to maintain work-life balance when your employer expects you to be available 24 hours a day." Amanda nodded sympathetically from across the table. "That's exactly why I was so relieved to step away from teaching. The constant pressure to grade papers and prepare lesson plans was affecting my ability to focus on what really mattered. She placed her hand on her belly again, the gesture emphasizing her point about prioritizing family over career advancement. Different people find fulfillment in different ways, I said carefully, trying to navigate between defending my choices and maintaining family harmony. Some women thrive in challenging professional environments, while others prefer to focus their energy on domestic responsibilities. Both choices are valid. Carol's laugh was light, musical, and somehow dismissive all at once. Of course, dear. Though I do think there's something to be said for recognizing when our priorities might need adjustment. Life has seasons, and sometimes we need to be flexible about adapting to changing circumstances. The conversation continued around topics that felt increasingly pointed, each comment designed to chip away at my confidence in my professional choices. Stories about women who had given up careers to focus on family and discovered greater happiness. Observations about the stress and health consequences of demanding work schedules. Discussions about the importance of being present for life's meaningful moments, rather than always chasing the next promotion or achievement. I participated when required, defended when necessary, but found myself increasingly aware that this was a coordinated campaign rather than casual dinner conversation. Every family member seemed to have talking points prepared, arguments ready to deploy, examples and anecdotes designed to support their central thesis that my career was a problem, requiring solution. As dessert was served, Carol's famous pecan pie accompanied by vanilla ice cream and coffee, the conversation turned to holiday plans and family traditions. Amanda and Greg would host Christmas Eve, as they had for the past 2 years since moving, into their new house. Carol and Frank would continue their tradition of Christmas morning brunch, followed by gift exchange and family photos. New Year's Eve would be celebrated at the country club, as it had been for the past decade. "We should talk about Aspen plans too," Brian said, cutting into his pie with obvious appreciation. "I know we usually wait until January to book the cabin for spring break, but with the new baby coming, Amanda and Greg might want to plan earlier this year." The Aspen cabin was another Thompson family tradition, a week-long ski vacation that had been happening annually since before Kevin and I were married. I had participated twice, both times feeling like an outsider attempting to navigate not just the social dynamics, but the physical demands of a sport I had never learned growing up. Skiing was expensive, equipment was expensive, and lessons were expensive. My family had taken road trips to national parks and camped in state forests, experiences that had given me a deep appreciation for natural beauty, but hadn't prepared me for the particular culture of mountain resorts. "Actually," Kevin said, his voice carrying a strange note of hesitancy, "Jessica and I have been talking about maybe taking a different kind of vacation this year. Something more relaxing, less focused on activities that require specific skills." I turned to look at him, confused by this revelation. We had never discussed changing our Aspen plans, had never even talked about alternative vacation options. Kevin was an excellent skier, had been participating in these family trips his entire life, and had always seemed to enjoy them despite my obvious discomfort with the sport. Carol's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Oh? What kind of vacation were you thinking about instead?" Kevin glanced at me, then back at his mother, his discomfort obvious. "Maybe something tropical. A beach resort where we could just relax and spend time together without worrying about schedules or activities." The suggestion hung in the air, like an unwelcome interruption to carefully laid plans. The Aspen trip wasn't just a vacation. It was a family tradition, a marker of belonging and shared experience that reinforced the Thompson family identity. Suggesting an alternative wasn't just about personal preference. It was a challenge to the established order. Frank set down his coffee cup with more force than necessary. "The cabin's been in our family for 15 years. Some of my best memories with you kids happened on those slopes." His voice carried the weight of paternal disappointment, the hurt of a father whose children were rejecting something he valued deeply. "It's not about rejecting the cabin," Kevin said quickly, his attempt at damage control transparent. "It's just that with Jessica's work schedule being so demanding, we thought a more restful vacation might be better this year." And there it was, my work schedule, presented as the problem that was disrupting family traditions and creating conflict, where none had existed before. Not Kevin's desire for a different kind of vacation, not his recognition that I felt excluded from family activities that required skills and equipment I didn't possess. My demanding job was the obstacle preventing us from participating fully in Thompson family life. I felt something shift inside me, a recognition that this conversation was headed toward the confrontation we had all been carefully avoiding. My phone buzzed again in my purse, another work notification that would provide the perfect excuse for Kevin to escalate his frustration with my career priorities. This time, when I reached for my phone to silence it, I made a different choice. Instead of apologizing and putting the device away, I pulled it out completely and glanced at the screen. The notification was indeed from work, but not routine communication. It was an urgent message about market volatility affecting several clients, including some in the construction sector. "Sorry," I said, not looking up from my phone. "This actually is urgent. There's some market instability affecting our clients, and I need to respond quickly to prevent potential losses." Kevin's hand clamped down on my wrist with surprising force. "Put the phone away, Jessica. Whatever it is can wait until tomorrow." I looked up at him, meeting his eyes directly for the first time all evening. In his expression, I saw not concern for my work-life balance or desire for family connection, but something darker. Desperation, maybe. Fear. The look of someone who realized that events were spiraling beyond his control. "Actually, it can't wait," I said calmly, pulling my wrist free from his grip. "Market conditions don't respect holiday schedules, and my clients depend on me to protect their investments." The silence that followed was different from the previous uncomfortable pauses. This was the silence of a family holding its collective breath, waiting to see whether the carefully constructed facade would hold or finally crack under pressure. Frank leaned back in his chair, studying me with new attention. "What kind of market instability are we talking about? Anything that might affect the construction industry specifically?" The question was casual, but something about the way he asked it, the particular focus on construction companies, made my pulse quicken. I thought about the financial documents hidden in my secure cloud storage, the evidence of fraudulent billing practices that could destroy Thompson Construction if discovered by the wrong people. Construction companies are particularly vulnerable to market fluctuations, I said carefully, especially smaller firms that might not have diversified revenue streams or substantial cash reserves to weather economic uncertainty. Brian's fork clattered against his dessert plate. "Are you saying family businesses like ours are at risk?" I met his gaze steadily, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his casual demeanor had evaporated completely. "I'm saying that any company engaged in questionable business practices should be concerned about increased scrutiny during market instability. Investors and regulatory agencies tend to look more closely at potential red flags when they're trying to minimize risk." The words fell into the dining room like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock and recognition that spread across every face at the table. Kevin's grip on my wrist returned, tighter this time, his fingers digging into my skin with enough force to leave marks. "That's enough," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Put the phone away and stop talking about work at my mother's dinner table." I looked down at his hand on my wrist, then back up at his face, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in our 3-year marriage. This wasn't about work-life balance or family traditions or holiday etiquette. This was about power and control and the family's growing desperation to neutralize a threat they could no longer ignore. When I spoke, my voice was steady and calm, carrying the authority I had learned to project in boardrooms and client meetings. Let go of my wrist. Kevin. He didn't move. If anything, his grip tightened, his knuckles white with tension. Around the table, his family watched our confrontation with expressions ranging from shock to satisfaction, as if they were finally witnessing the scene they had been orchestrating for months. "Put the phone down first," he said through gritted teeth. I smiled then, feeling an unexpected sense of peace wash over me. The pretense was finally over. The careful dance of family dinners and social expectations had dissolved into what it had always been underneath. A power struggle between people who wanted to control me and my determination to remain free. "No," I said simply. That's when Kevin's composure finally shattered completely, and he grabbed my phone with his free hand and hurled it across Carol's pristine dining room. The crash of my phone against Carol's antique sideboard reverberated through the dining room like a gunshot. 12 people froze in tableau, forks suspended halfway to mouths, wine glasses paused mid-sip, conversations cut off mid-sentence. The only sound was the gentle tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, and my own measured breathing as I stared at the scattered pieces of black plastic and glass that had once contained everything Kevin's family was desperate to keep hidden. I stood slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor with deliberate precision. Every eye in the room tracked my movement as I walked to where my phone lay broken, its screen a spiderweb of cracks that reflected the chandelier light in fractured rainbows. I knelt and gathered the pieces with careful attention, placing each fragment in my palm like evidence at a crime scene. When I straightened and turned back to face the table, the silence had taken on a different quality. It wasn't the uncomfortable pause of people unsure how to react to a social misstep. This was the breathless quiet of predators and prey, each side recognizing that the careful game they had been playing for months was finally over. "Well," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the room, "I suppose that settles the question of whether you respect my career or not." Kevin remained frozen in his chair, his hand still extended from the throwing motion, his face cycling through expressions of shock, anger, and something that looked remarkably like fear. Carol's fingers clutched her pearl necklace as if it were a rosary, her perfectly composed hostess mask slipping to reveal the calculating woman underneath. Frank had set down his coffee cup and was leaning forward slightly, his business instincts clearly engaged as he tried to assess the damage and plan damage control. Brian was the first to find his voice. "Jesus, Kevin, what the hell is wrong? With you?" His attempt at outraged normalcy fell flat in the charged atmosphere, too little and too late to restore the pretense that this was still a family dinner gone slightly awry. Amanda pressed her hand to her chest in a gesture of shocked dismay that would have been more convincing if I hadn't seen her exchange meaningful glances with her mother throughout the evening. "Kevin, that was completely uncalled for." "Jessica, I'm so sorry. He must be more stressed about work than we realized." The attempt to provide Kevin with an excuse, to frame his violence as aberrant behavior, rather than the logical escalation of months of psychological pressure, told me everything I needed to know about how this family operated. They would close ranks, rewrite history, and gaslight me into believing that what I had just witnessed was somehow my fault for being unreasonable about work boundaries. I looked at each face around the table, memorizing their expressions in this moment of revealed truth. These people who had welcomed me into their family with smiles and wedding gifts, who had included me in holiday traditions and birthday celebrations, who had made me believe I was building something meaningful and lasting. They were strangers, wearing familiar masks, united in their determination to neutralize the threat I had unknowingly become. "You know what the really interesting thing is?" I said conversationally, as if discussing the weather rather than the destruction of my personal property. I wasn't actually checking work emails when Kevin grabbed my phone. I was documenting this conversation. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Frank's face flushed a deep red that clashed with his expensive silk tie while Carol's hand tightened on her necklace until her knuckles showed white against her tanned skin. Brian started to speak, then stopped, apparently reconsidering whatever he had been about to say. Kevin finally found his voice, though it came out as more of a croak than his usual confident tone. "What do you mean, documenting?" I smiled, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over me like armor. "I mean recording, audio and video. Every conversation we've had about my job over the past 2 months. Every family dinner where the topic somehow turned to my career priorities. Every subtle and not-so-subtle attempt to pressure me into quitting Pinnacle. The silence stretched between us like a chasm, filled with the weight of implications and calculations. I could practically see the wheels turning in Frank's mind as he tried to remember exactly what had been said over recent dinners, what conversations might have been captured, what evidence might now exist of their coordinated campaign. Carol was the first to attempt damage control, her voice taking on the soothing tone she typically reserved for charity board meetings, where difficult donors needed to be managed. "Darling, I think you might be misunderstanding our concern. We're family and family members look out for each other. If we've seemed worried about your work schedule, it's only because we want you to be happy and healthy." "Family members," I repeated, tasting the words like wine. "Is that what we are, Carol? Because families generally don't conspire to destroy each other's careers behind closed doors." Brian leaned forward, his earlier shock replaced by something sharper and more dangerous. "That's a serious accusation, Jessica. I hope you have evidence to back up claims like that." I pulled my backup phone from my purse, a device Kevin had never seen me use because I kept it for emergencies and secure communications with certain clients. The family's eyes tracked the movement like hawks watching a mouse, their sudden tension confirming that they understood exactly how precarious their situation had become. "Actually, I do have evidence," I said, unlocking the device with practiced ease. "Would you like me to play some of the recordings? I have Kevin's conversation from last week where he specifically mentioned that the family needed to accelerate the timeline for getting me out of Pinnacle. Or perhaps you'd prefer the email thread I discovered on his laptop, the one where you all discussed the Jessica situation and debated different strategies for forcing me to quit." Kevin's face went white, then gray, as if he were physically ill. "You went through my laptop?" "Your laptop that you left open on our kitchen counter with your email displayed," I corrected. "I'm not a thief, Kevin. I'm just observant. It's actually one of the skills that makes me good at my job, the job you've all been so eager for me to abandon." Frank stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with enough force to rattle the china on the table. "Now listen here, young lady. I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but this family won't be threatened or blackmailed by someone who's forgotten the meaning of loyalty and gratitude." I met his gaze steadily, drawing on years of experience dealing with aggressive clients and hostile negotiations. "I'm not playing a game, Frank. I'm protecting myself from people who have been playing games with my life and my career for months. And I'm certainly not threatening anyone. I'm simply stating facts about what I've discovered." The word "discovered" hung in the air between us, loaded with implications that went far beyond family dynamics and career pressure. Frank's face cycled through several expressions before settling on the careful neutrality of someone who realized he was walking through a minefield. "What exactly do you think you've discovered?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. I tilted my head slightly, studying his face with the same analytical attention I brought to financial statements. "Well, let's see. I've discovered that Thompson Construction has been consistently overbilling clients by an average of 30% over the past 18 months. I've discovered fictitious subcontractor expenses totaling nearly $2 million across multiple projects. I've discovered that you've been reporting false material costs to insurance companies and pocketing the difference." Each revelation landed like a physical blow. Brian's face went ashen, his earlier bravado evaporating as he realized the scope of what I knew. Carol's hand flew to her mouth, though whether from genuine shock or calculated dismay was impossible to determine. Amanda and Nicole exchanged confused glances, clearly aware that something significant was happening, but not fully understanding the implications. "I've also discovered," I continued relentlessly, "that the family's financial situation is far more precarious than you've led anyone to believe. The house is mortgaged to nearly twice its value. The Aspen cabin has been used as collateral for multiple loans. The children's trust funds have been systematically depleted to cover operating expenses." Kevin made a strangled sound in his throat, his hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly that his knuckles had gone white. "Jessica, stop. You don't understand what you're doing." "Oh, but I do understand," I replied, my voice gaining strength with each word. "I understand that you married me because my income helped stabilize your family's deteriorating financial situation. I understand that when I got promoted and gained access to more sensitive information, you all realized I might eventually discover your fraudulent business practices. I understand that the pressure for me to quit my job was never about work-life balance or starting a family. It was about eliminating a threat to your criminal enterprise." The words "criminal enterprise" seemed to echo in the room like an accusation from a prosecutor's office. Frank's face had gone from red to purple, his breathing shallow and rapid. Carol had begun crying, though her tears looked more like frustration than genuine remorse. "We never meant for it to go this far," Brian said, suddenly, his voice breaking slightly. "It started small, just padding a few invoices to help with cash flow during the recession. But then clients kept demanding lower bids, and we had commitments to employees, and the bank was pressuring us about loan payments." "Brian, shut up," Frank snapped, but the damage was done. The admission hung in the air like a confession, confirming everything I had suspected and more. I looked around the table at these people who had been my family for 3 years, seeing them clearly for the first time. Carol, who had criticized my work schedule while living off money stolen from construction clients. Frank, who had lectured me about family loyalty while systematically defrauding his own business partners. Kevin, who had promised to love and support me while plotting to manipulate me into silence. "The really tragic thing," I said, my voice softening with what might have been genuine sadness, "is that I would have helped you if you had just been honest with me. I'm good at financial restructuring. I could have helped you develop a legitimate plan to address your cash flow problems and pay back what you've stolen. Instead, you chose to treat me as an enemy to be neutralized rather than a family member who might offer solutions." Amanda spoke for the first time since Kevin had thrown my phone, her voice small and uncertain. "What are you going to do now?" I considered the question seriously, looking at each face around the table. These people had manipulated me, lied to me, and ultimately threatened my career and my financial security. They had violated my trust in the most fundamental way possible, treating our marriage and family relationship as a facade to be maintained only as long as it served their purposes. "What I'm going to do," I said finally, "depends entirely on what happens next. You see, I have choices to make, and so do all of you." I set my backup phone on the table where everyone could see it, the device representing both evidence and potential weapon in whatever came next. I could report everything I've discovered to the appropriate authorities. The FBI takes construction fraud very seriously, especially when it involves federal projects like the airport expansion you've been working on. I could also notify your insurance companies about the false claims, and the IRS about the unreported income from your billing schemes. The silence that followed was heavy with fear and calculation. I could see each family member processing the implications, weighing their options, considering what might be salvaged from the wreckage of their carefully constructed deceptions. Or, I continued, I could walk away, divorce Kevin, take what's legally mine, and leave you all to figure out how to clean up your own mess. No criminal charges, no insurance investigations, no federal audits. Just a clean break and a commitment from all of you to never contact me again. Kevin's voice was barely audible when he spoke. What would you want in the divorce? I had been thinking about this moment for weeks, ever since I first discovered the extent of their deception. Not the vindictive fantasies of a betrayed wife, but the practical calculations of someone who needed to protect her own interests while extracting herself from a dangerous situation. I want our house free and clear, since most of the mortgage payments came from my salary anyway. I want my car, my personal belongings, and my retirement accounts. I want no responsibility for any Thompson construction debts or legal liabilities. And I want a signed agreement that none of you will ever interfere with my career or attempt to contact me again. The terms were reasonable, perhaps even generous considering what I could demand with the evidence I possessed. I was asking for what was essentially mine already, plus protection from future harassment. No punitive damages, no attempt to destroy their lives in return for their attempt to destroy mine. Frank's business instincts seemed to kick in, his survival mode overriding his anger and embarrassment. And in return? In return, I forget everything I've learned about Thompson Construction's business practices. The recordings get deleted. The documents get destroyed, and I never speak to anyone about what I've discovered. Your secrets stay buried, and you get the chance to fix your problems without outside interference. It was a devil's bargain, offering them freedom from consequences in exchange for my own freedom from their manipulation. Not justice in any traditional sense, but perhaps the closest thing to it that was actually achievable in a situation where everyone had something to lose. Carol had stopped crying and was studying me with new attention, as if seeing me for the first time as an opponent worthy of respect rather than an obstacle to be managed. How do we know you won't change? Your mind later? How do we know you won't decide to turn us in after you've gotten what you want from the divorce? I smiled, recognizing the question as both practical concern and grudging acknowledgement of my strategic thinking. Because I'm not vindictive, Carol. I'm practical. Destroying your family wouldn't undo the damage you've done to my marriage, or give me back the 3 years I spent trying to earn your acceptance. It would just create more chaos and more pain for everyone involved. Besides, I added, picking up my broken phone and examining the shattered screen, I have everything I need to start over somewhere else. Unlike your family, I built my career on my own merit rather than on fraud and manipulation. I don't need your destruction to validate my worth. The conversation continued for another hour, covering details and logistics, terms and conditions, the practical mechanics of ending a marriage and dissolving family connections. Kevin sat mostly silent throughout the discussion, occasionally answering direct questions, but otherwise seeming stunned by the rapid collapse of everything he thought he had controlled. As we worked through the specifics, I found myself observing the family dynamics with clinical detachment. Without the pressure of trying to fit in or earn their approval, I could see clearly how they operated. The subtle hierarchies, the unspoken alliances, the way power flowed through relationships based on financial dependency and shared secrets. Frank dominated the negotiations, falling back on business instincts honed through decades of managing complex construction deals. Carol provided emotional intelligence, reading reactions and adjusting tactics based on psychological insights. About motivation and leverage, Brian and Amanda contributed practical concerns about timeline and implementation, while their spouses remained largely silent observers to drama that would reshape their extended family structure. Through it all, Kevin seemed increasingly detached from the proceedings, as if he were watching his life be dismantled by forces beyond his control. Perhaps he was finally understanding that his role in his family's criminal enterprise had cost him not just his marriage, but any chance of a future built on honesty and genuine partnership. As the evening wound down and terms were tentatively agreed upon, I felt an unexpected sense of lightness. The pretending was finally over. The careful performance of being someone I wasn't, of caring about people who saw me only as a useful asset or potential threat. of trying to build something meaningful on a foundation of lies and manipulation. I gathered my things and prepared to leave, knowing that this would be the last time I would sit at Carol's dining room table, the last time I would participate in Thompson family traditions, the last time I would try to find my place in a world that had never intended to make room for me. As I stood to go, Kevin finally spoke directly to me for the first time since the negotiations had begun. "I did love you, you know. In the beginning, before everything got so complicated." I looked at him for a long moment, this man I had married and trusted and tried to build a life with. He looked younger somehow, stripped of the confident facade that wealth and family connections had provided, reduced to someone who was finally facing the consequences of choices made in desperation and selfishness. "I know you did," I said gently. "But love without honesty isn't really love at all. It's just another kind of performance." I left the Thompson mansion that night with my broken phone, my backup device, and a clear understanding of exactly what I needed to do to reclaim my life. Behind me, I left a family in crisis, forced to confront not only the collapse of their criminal scheme, but the deeper questions about who they were and what they had become in pursuit of maintaining appearances. The drive back to our townhouse gave me time to think, to process what had happened and plan what came next. Tomorrow, I would call my lawyer and begin divorce proceedings. I would secure new housing and arrange for movers to collect my belongings. I would notify my supervisor at Pinnacle about potential conflicts of interest requiring recusal from certain client accounts. But tonight, I simply drove through the quiet streets of Denver, feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. The peace that comes from finally telling the truth and refusing to participate in other people's lies. The broken phone on my passenger seat represented the end of one chapter of my life, but also the beginning of something new. Something built on my own terms, my own values, my own definition of what family and loyalty really meant. For the first time in 3 years, I was truly free. The first thing I did when I got home was change the locks. Not because I feared for my physical safety, but because I needed to establish boundaries immediately and definitively. The locksmith arrived at 7 in the morning, a grizzled man named Pete who took one look at my situation and asked no questions beyond confirming which locks needed replacing. By 8:30, I had new keys and the psychological security that comes from controlling access to your own space. Kevin's first call came at 9:15, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Jessica, we need to talk. I can't get into the house, and my things are still there. You can't just lock me out of my own home." I poured myself coffee and settled into the leather chair by our living room window, watching the morning joggers navigate the tree-lined streets of Lodo. "It's not your home anymore, Kevin. As of last night, our marriage became a business transaction, and this house is my primary asset in that transaction. Your belongings will be packed and ready for pickup by this afternoon." The silence on the sea. Other end stretched long enough that I wondered if he had hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note of genuine bewilderment that might have touched me under different circumstances. "How did it come to this? 3 years ago, you loved me. We were planning a future together." I considered his question seriously, recognizing the pain behind it even as I maintained my emotional distance. 3 years ago, I loved the man I thought you were. I loved someone I believed was honest and supportive. Someone who saw me as an equal partner, rather than a problem to be managed. That man never existed, Kevin. He was a character you played until you didn't need to anymore. His sharp intake of breath told me the words had hit their target. "That's not fair. I did love you. I do love you. Everything just got so complicated. With the business and the family pressures, I never meant for it to go this far." "Intention is irrelevant," I replied, my voice carrying the professional neutrality I used in difficult client negotiations. "Actions have consequences regardless of motivation. You and your family made a series of choices that led to this outcome. Now, you have to live with the results. The moving crew arrived at 10, a professional service I had hired through my company's corporate relocation program. While they worked, I retreated to my home office and began the systematic process of untangling my life from Kevin's. Bank accounts to be separated, credit cards to be canceled, insurance policies to be modified. Each phone call and email represented another thread being cut, another connection severed. My lawyer, Margaret Chen, arrived at noon with a team of assistants and enough legal documents to intimidate a small corporation. Margaret was a formidable woman in her 50s who specialized in high-asset divorces and had built her reputation on protecting clients from spouses who attempted to hide assets or manipulate financial information. I had chosen her specifically because of her experience with cases involving business fraud and her willingness to pursue aggressive legal strategies when necessary. "This is quite a situation you've found yourself in," Margaret said, reviewing the evidence I had compiled over the previous weeks. "The recordings are admissible in court, and the financial documents you've gathered would be enough to trigger multiple federal investigations. Your husband's family has put themselves in an extremely vulnerable position." We spent 2 hours mapping out strategy and contingencies, preparing for every possible response from Kevin and the Thompson family. Margaret's assistants drafted separation agreements, property division documents, and the various legal instruments needed to protect my interests while expediting the divorce process. "The key thing to remember," Margaret advised, "is that you hold all the cards here. They need this to be resolved quietly and quickly, which gives you tremendous leverage. Don't let guilt or sentiment cause you to give up advantages you've earned through their deception." By mid-afternoon, Kevin's belongings were packed and loaded into a moving truck, with an inventory list documenting every item for legal purposes. I kept his possessions in storage for 3 days, giving him time to arrange pickup while ensuring I wasn't accused of disposing of his property improperly. The house felt different with his things gone, larger somehow, as if removing his physical presence had also eliminated the psychological weight of his expectations and judgments. Carol called that evening, her voice carrying the careful modulation of someone who had spent considerable time planning exactly what to say. "Jessica, darling, I think we all said things last night that we regret. Family disagreements can bring out the worst in people, but that doesn't mean relationships can't be repaired." I almost admired her strategy. By framing the previous night's confrontation as a family disagreement rather than the exposure of criminal fraud, she was attempting to minimize the significance of what had been revealed while positioning herself as the mature adult willing to forgive and move forward. "There's nothing to repair, Carol," I said, settling into my newly rearranged living room with a glass of wine. "Last night wasn't a disagreement. It was a revelation. I finally saw your family clearly, and I didn't like what I discovered." Her laugh was forced, tinged with the kind of desperation that comes from watching carefully laid plans crumble. "Oh, honey, you're being so dramatic. Every family has its challenges, and every business faces difficult decisions during tough economic times. The important thing is that we support each other through difficulties rather than tearing each other apart." "Support," I repeated, tasting the word like something bitter. "Is that what you call systematically pressuring me to abandon my career? Is that what you call conspiring to manipulate my marriage for your own benefit? Because I have different definitions for those behaviors." The silence that followed told me she was recalibrating her approach, abandoning the maternal guilt trip for something more direct. When she spoke again, her voice had hardened considerably. "You need to think very carefully about what you're doing, Jessica. Destroying this family won't bring you happiness, and it certainly won't help your career prospects in Denver's business community." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Carol was reminding me that the Thompson family had connections throughout Denver's social and business networks, relationships that could potentially impact my professional future if they chose to use them vindictively. "Are you threatening me, Carol?" I asked, my voice calm despite the anger building in my chest. I'm simply pointing out realities, she replied smoothly. Denver is a smaller city than people realize, especially in business circles. Reputations matter, and people remember how others handle family difficulties. It would be unfortunate if your professional relationships were affected by personal choices. That man never existed, Kevin. He was a character you played until you didn't need to anymore. His sharp intake of breath told me the words had hit their target. That's not fair. I did love you. I do love you. Everything just got so complicated. With the business and the family pressures, I never meant for it to go this far. Intention is irrelevant, I replied, my voice carrying the professional neutrality I used in difficult client negotiations. Actions have consequences regardless of motivation. You and your family made a series of choices that led to this outcome. Now, you have to live with the results. The moving crew arrived at 10, a professional service I had hired through my company's corporate relocation program. While they worked, I retreated to my home office and began the systematic process of untangling my life from Kevin's. Bank accounts to be separated, credit cards to be canceled, insurance policies to be modified. Each phone call and email represented another thread being cut, another connection severed. My lawyer, Margaret Chen, arrived at noon with a team of assistants and enough legal documents to intimidate a small corporation. Margaret was a formidable woman in her 50s who specialized in high-asset divorces and had built her reputation on protecting clients from spouses who attempted to hide assets or manipulate financial information. I had chosen her specifically because of her experience with cases involving business fraud and her willingness to pursue aggressive legal strategies when necessary. "This is quite a situation you've found yourself in," Margaret said, reviewing the evidence I had compiled over the previous weeks. "The recordings are admissible in court, and the financial documents you've gathered would be enough to trigger multiple federal investigations. Your husband's family has put themselves in an extremely vulnerable position." We spent 2 hours mapping out strategy and contingencies, preparing for every possible response from Kevin and the Thompson family. Margaret's assistants drafted separation agreements, property division documents, and the various legal instruments needed to protect my interests while expediting the divorce process. "The key thing to remember," Margaret advised, "is that you hold all the cards here. They need this to be resolved quietly and quickly, which gives you tremendous leverage. Don't let guilt or sentiment cause you to give up advantages you've earned through their deception." By mid-afternoon, Kevin's belongings were packed and loaded into a moving truck, with an inventory list documenting every item for legal purposes. I kept his possessions in storage for 3 days, giving him time to arrange pickup while ensuring I wasn't accused of disposing of his property improperly. The house felt different with his things gone, larger somehow, as if removing his physical presence had also eliminated the psychological weight of his expectations and judgments. Carol called that evening, her voice carrying the careful modulation of someone who had spent considerable time planning exactly what to say. "Jessica, darling, I think we all said things last night that we regret. Family disagreements can bring out the worst in people, but that doesn't mean relationships can't be repaired." I almost admired her strategy. By framing the previous night's confrontation as a family disagreement rather than the exposure of criminal fraud, she was attempting to minimize the significance of what had been revealed while positioning herself as the mature adult willing to forgive and move forward. "There's nothing to repair, Carol," I said, settling into my newly rearranged living room with a glass of wine. "Last night wasn't a disagreement. It was a revelation. I finally saw your family clearly, and I didn't like what I discovered." Her laugh was forced, tinged with the kind of desperation that comes from watching carefully laid plans crumble. "Oh, honey, you're being so dramatic. Every family has its challenges, and every business faces difficult decisions during tough economic times. The important thing is that we support each other through difficulties rather than tearing each other apart." "Support," I repeated, tasting the word like something bitter. Is that what you call systematically pressuring me to abandon my career? Is that what you call conspiring to manipulate my marriage for your own benefit? Because I have different definitions for those behaviors. The silence that followed told me she was recalibrating her approach, abandoning the maternal guilt trip for something more direct. When she spoke again, her voice had hardened considerably. You need to think very carefully about what you're doing, Jessica. Destroying this family won't bring you happiness, and it certainly won't help your career prospects in Denver's business community. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Carol was reminding me that the Thompson family had connections throughout Denver's social and business networks, relationships that could potentially impact my professional future if they chose to use them vindictively. Are you threatening me, Carol? I asked, my voice calm despite the anger building in my chest. I'm simply pointing out realities, she replied smoothly. Denver is a smaller city than people realize, especially in business circles. Reputations matter, and people remember how others handle family difficulties. It would be unfortunate if your professional relationships were affected by personal choices. I stood and walked to my window, looking out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the early evening darkness. Somewhere out there were clients who trusted my judgment, colleagues who respected my expertise, and business relationships I had built through years of competent work. The idea that Carol thought she could threaten those achievements revealed how fundamentally she misunderstood both me and the business world I operated in. You know what the beautiful thing about merit-based success is, Carol? I said, turning away from the window. It's portable. My skills, my reputation, and my client relationships exist independently of your family's social connections. If Denver becomes uncomfortable for me professionally, I can take my talents to Chicago or New York or Los Angeles and rebuild everything I've lost within a year. I paused, letting that reality sink in before delivering the more pointed message. But your family's problems are location-specific. Thompson Construction can't just relocate to avoid the consequences of years of fraud. Your social connections can't protect you from federal investigations. Your country club memberships won't help you when the FBI starts asking questions about your business practices. The sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line told me my words had found their mark. Carol was intelligent enough to understand that her threats were not only ineffective, but potentially counterproductive. Pushing me too hard could easily convert my generous offer of silence into active cooperation with law enforcement. We don't want this to become adversarial, she said finally, her tone considerably more conciliatory than it had been moments earlier. Then stop making it adversarial, I replied. Accept the terms we discussed last night. Finalize the divorce. Proceedings quickly and quietly, and everyone can move on with their lives. Continue trying to manipulate or threaten me, and I'll reconsider my generous offer to forget everything I've learned. Frank called the following morning, his approach more direct and business-focused than his wife's attempt at maternal manipulation. I've spoken with our lawyers, and they've advised us to accept your terms. We're prepared to move forward with the divorce settlement as discussed, but we need some assurances about your discretion going forward. I appreciated his straightforward approach, even as I recognized it for what it was. The acknowledgement that their position was untenable and resistance would only make their situation worse. What kind of assurances are you looking for? We need a written agreement that specifies exactly what information you'll keep confidential and what circumstances might void that agreement, he said. Our lawyers want to ensure there are no misunderstandings down the road. It was a reasonable request from their perspective, though it also revealed their continuing failure to understand the dynamics of our situation. They were still thinking, in terms of contracts and legal agreements, as if my silence was a service they were purchasing rather than a gift I was offering out of practical self-interest. I'm willing to formalize the agreement, I said, but understand that my discretion is contingent on your family's behavior going forward. Any attempt to interfere with my career, my personal life, or my professional relationships will void our arrangement immediately. We spent the next week negotiating details through our respective lawyers, a process that revealed just how thoroughly the Thompson family had integrated their legitimate business operations with their fraudulent activities. Separating Kevin's personal assets from potentially tainted business income required careful legal maneuvering and significant documentation. Meanwhile, I began the process of rebuilding my social and professional life without the Thompson family connections. The divorce wouldn't be final for several months, but I started establishing my independence immediately. New banking relationships, updated emergency contacts, revised beneficiaries on insurance policies and retirement accounts. The most challenging aspect was explaining the separation to colleagues and clients without revealing the underlying reasons. I developed a standard explanation about irreconcilable differences regarding career priorities and family expectations, which was true enough while omitting the criminal elements that made the situation legally complex. Brian attempted to contact me directly, calling my office line at Pinnacle with what he claimed was a business proposition. "Jessica, I know things got heated the other night, but I think we could find a way to work together professionally. Thompson Construction could use someone with your financial analysis skills, and you'd have the flexibility to set your own schedule." The offer was transparently desperate, a last-ditch attempt to bring me inside their organization where they could monitor my activities and ensure my continued silence. But it also revealed their fundamental misunderstanding of professional ethics and legal liability. "Brian, you can't seriously think I would consider working for a company that I know is engaged in systematic fraud," I said, not bothering to hide my incredulity. "That would make me an accessory to your crimes, not to mention a violation of my professional ethical obligations." His nervous laugh confirmed that he hadn't thought through the implications of his offer. I wasn't talking about anything illegal, just standard financial consulting, helping us streamline operations and improve efficiency. "There's nothing standard about Thompson Construction's operations," I replied, "and I'm not interested in helping you improve your efficiency at defrauding clients and insurance companies." The conversation ended abruptly, but it served as a useful reminder that the family still didn't fully grasp the seriousness of their legal situation or the impossibility of returning to normal business relationships after what had been revealed. Amanda made the final family contact, appearing at my office building lobby on a Thursday afternoon with her newborn daughter and an expression of genuine distress. Security called to ask if I would meet with her, and curiosity compelled me to agree to a brief conversation in the building's public cafe. She looked exhausted in the way that new mothers do, her usually perfect appearance replaced by the practical clothing and minimal makeup of someone operating on too little sleep and too much stress. The baby was beautiful, a tiny girl with Kevin's blue eyes and Amanda's delicate features, completely innocent of the family drama that surrounded her birth. "I wanted you to meet Emma," Amanda said, adjusting the baby's blanket with practiced efficiency. "She's named after my grandmother, the one who started the family business with Grandpa Thompson back in the 50s. The symbolism wasn't lost on me." Amanda was presenting the newest member of the Thompson family, the innocent child who would be affected by whatever consequences followed from their parents' and grandparents' choices. I stood and walked to my window, looking out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the early evening darkness. Somewhere out there were clients who trusted my judgment, colleagues who respected my expertise, and business relationships I had built through years of competent work. The idea that Carol thought she could threaten those achievements revealed how fundamentally she misunderstood both me and the business world I operated in. "You know what the beautiful thing about merit-based success is, Carol?" I said, turning away from the window. "It's portable. My skills, my reputation, and my client relationships exist independently of your family's social connections. If Denver becomes uncomfortable for me professionally, I can take my talents to Chicago or New York or Los Angeles and rebuild everything I've lost within a year." I paused, letting that reality sink in before delivering the more pointed message. "But your family's problems are location-specific. Thompson Construction can't just relocate to avoid the consequences of years of fraud. Your social connections can't protect you from federal investigations. Your country club memberships won't help you when the FBI starts asking questions about your business practices. The sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line told me my words had found their mark. Carol was intelligent enough to understand that her threats were not only ineffective, but potentially counterproductive. Pushing me too hard could easily convert my generous offer of silence into active cooperation with law enforcement. "We don't want this to become adversarial," she said finally, her tone considerably more conciliatory than it had been moments earlier. "Then stop making it adversarial," I replied. "Accept the terms we discussed last night. Finalize the divorce. Proceedings quickly and quietly, and everyone can move on with their lives. Continue trying to manipulate or threaten me, and I'll reconsider my generous offer to forget everything I've learned." Frank called the following morning, his approach more direct and business-focused than his wife's attempt at maternal manipulation. "I've spoken with our lawyers, and they've advised us to accept your terms. We're prepared to move forward with the divorce settlement as discussed, but we need some assurances about your discretion going forward." I appreciated his straightforward approach, even as I recognized it for what it was: the acknowledgement that their position was untenable and resistance would only make their situation worse. "What kind of assurances are you looking for?" "We need a written agreement that specifies exactly what information you'll keep confidential, and what circumstances might void that agreement," he said. "Our lawyers want to ensure there are no misunderstandings down the road." It was a reasonable request from their perspective, though it also revealed their continuing failure to understand the dynamics of our situation. They were still thinking, in terms of contracts and legal agreements, as if my silence was a service they were purchasing rather than a gift I was offering out of practical self-interest. "I'm willing to formalize the agreement," I said, "but understand that my discretion is contingent on your family's behavior going forward. Any attempt to interfere with my career, my personal life, or my professional relationships will void our arrangement immediately." We spent the next week negotiating details through our respective lawyers, a process that revealed just how thoroughly the Thompson family had integrated their legitimate business operations with their fraudulent activities. Separating Kevin's personal assets from potentially tainted business income required careful legal maneuvering and significant documentation. Meanwhile, I began the process of rebuilding my social and professional life without the Thompson family connections. The divorce wouldn't be final for several months, but I started establishing my independence immediately. New banking relationships, updated emergency contacts, revised beneficiaries on insurance policies and retirement accounts. The most challenging aspect was explaining the separation to colleagues and clients without revealing the underlying reasons. I developed a standard explanation about irreconcilable differences regarding career priorities and family expectations, which was true enough while omitting the criminal elements that made the situation legally complex. Brian attempted to contact me directly, calling my office line at Pinnacle with what he claimed was a business proposition. "Jessica, I know things got heated the other night, but I think we could find a way to work together professionally. Thompson Construction could use someone with your financial analysis skills, and you'd have the flexibility to set your own schedule." The offer was transparently desperate, a last-ditch attempt to bring me inside their organization where they could monitor my activities and ensure my continued silence. But it also revealed their fundamental misunderstanding of professional ethics and legal liability. "Brian, you can't seriously think I would consider working for a company that I know is engaged in systematic fraud," I said, not bothering to hide my incredulity. "That would make me an accessory to your crimes, not to mention a violation of my professional ethical obligations." His nervous laugh confirmed that he hadn't thought through the implications of his offer. I wasn't talking about anything illegal, just standard financial consulting, helping us streamline operations and improve efficiency. "There's nothing standard about Thompson Construction's operations," I replied, "and I'm not interested in helping you improve your efficiency at defrauding clients and insurance companies. The conversation ended abruptly, but it served as a useful reminder that the family still didn't fully grasp the seriousness of their legal situation or the impossibility of returning to normal business relationships after what had been revealed. Amanda made the final family contact, appearing at my office building lobby on a Thursday afternoon with her newborn daughter and an expression of genuine distress. Security called to ask if I would meet with her, and curiosity compelled me to agree to a brief conversation in the building's public cafe. She looked exhausted in the way that new mothers do, her usually perfect appearance replaced by the practical clothing and minimal makeup of someone operating on too little sleep and too much stress. The baby was beautiful, a tiny girl with Kevin's blue eyes and Amanda's delicate features, completely innocent of the family drama that surrounded her birth. "I wanted you to meet Emma," Amanda said, adjusting the baby's blanket with practiced efficiency. "She's named after my grandmother, the one who started the family business with Grandpa Thompson back in the 50s. The symbolism wasn't lost on me." Amanda was presenting the newest member of the Thompson family, the innocent child who would be affected by whatever consequences followed from their parents' and grandparents' choices. It was emotional manipulation of the most sophisticated kind, designed to activate my maternal instincts and sense of responsibility for protecting family relationships. "She's beautiful," I said honestly, because the baby was beautiful and deserved acknowledgement regardless of the circumstances surrounding our meeting. "You and Greg must be very happy." Amanda's eyes filled with tears, though whether from exhaustion, hormones, or genuine distress was impossible to determine. "We are happy, but we're also terrified. The lawyers say that if this situation escalates, it could affect all of us. Greg could lose his job, we could lose our house, Emma could grow up with the stigma of having a family involved in criminal charges." I felt a pang of sympathy for Amanda's situation, recognizing that she was probably the least culpable family member in terms of direct involvement with the fraudulent business practices. She had left her teaching career to focus on motherhood, seemingly unaware of the criminal activities that funded her comfortable lifestyle. "I don't want to see Emma or your other children hurt by their grandparents' choices," I said carefully. "That's why I've offered your family a way to resolve this situation quietly and move forward with their lives." Amanda leaned forward, her desperation becoming more apparent. "But what if someone else discovers what you've discovered? What if there are other investigators or auditors who start looking into the business? We can't control every possible outcome." It was a sophisticated question that revealed either Amanda's own intelligence or careful coaching from the family's legal team. She was essentially asking about my long-term commitment to silence in scenarios where other evidence might emerge, independently. "If your family has been honest with me about the scope of their activities, and if they stop the fraudulent practices immediately, there's no reason for anyone else to discover what I've discovered," I replied. "But if there are other schemes I'm not aware of, or if they continue illegal activities after this conversation, then all bets are off." I stood to leave, recognizing that the conversation had served its purpose for both of us. Amanda had delivered her family's final emotional appeal, and I had reinforced my conditions for continued cooperation. As I walked back to the elevators, I heard Amanda call my name. When I turned back, she was standing with her baby, her expression mixing sadness with something that might have been respect. "For what it's worth," she said, "I think you're handling this better than any of us would have if the situation were reversed. You have every right to be angry, and every right to want revenge. The fact that you're offering us a way out instead of just destroying us says something about who you are as a person." Her words stayed with me as I returned to my office and threw myself back into the demanding but predictable world of financial analysis. Whatever else happened with the Thompson family situation, I was building something new for myself, something based on my own choices and values, rather than the expectations and manipulations of others. The divorce papers were filed the following week, officially beginning the legal process that would sever my connection to Kevin and his family permanently. Margaret estimated 6 months for finalization, assuming no complications or contested issues arose during the proceedings. 6 months to completely untangle 3 years of shared life and rebuild an independent existence. 6 months to prove that my worth wasn't dependent on marriage or family approval, that my success was portable and renewable regardless of personal setbacks. As I reviewed the financial documents that would govern my post-divorce life, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: excitement about the future. Not the nervous anticipation of someone hoping for the best, but the confident expectation of someone who had taken control of her own destiny and was prepared to create exactly the life she wanted. The Thompson family had tried to make me smaller, to reduce me to a manageable problem that could be solved through pressure and manipulation. Instead, they had inadvertently freed me to become larger, to reclaim not just my career and my independence, but my sense of self-worth and personal agency. Their loss would be my gain in the most literal sense possible. The final divorce hearing took place on a crisp February morning, exactly 3 months after that catastrophic Thanksgiving dinner. I sat in the courthouse wearing my most expensive navy suit, the one I typically reserved for major client presentations, feeling more composed than I had in years. Across the courtroom, Kevin fidgeted in his chair next to his attorney, occasionally glancing in my direction with expressions that cycled between regret and resentment. Judge Patricia Ramirez reviewed our settlement agreement with the methodical attention of someone who had presided over hundreds of similar cases, but still took each one seriously. The terms we had negotiated were unusual in their complexity, requiring detailed documentation about asset separation and ongoing confidentiality obligations, but nothing that raised red flags about coercion or unfairness. "This appears to be a comprehensive agreement," Judge Ramirez said, looking up from the documents. "Mrs. Thompson, do you understand that you're entitled to a larger portion of marital assets than what you're accepting under these terms?" Margaret had prepared me for this question. Colorado's equitable distribution laws would typically entitle me to a significant portion of Kevin's family business interests and inherited assets, but I had deliberately chosen to claim only what I could clearly trace to my own contributions and earnings. "Yes, Your Honor, I understand," I replied clearly. "I prefer a clean separation with no ongoing financial entanglements or obligations. The assets I'm claiming are either individually owned or can be directly attributed to my income during the marriage." Kevin's attorney shifted uncomfortably, clearly recognizing that his client was receiving an unexpectedly generous settlement given the circumstances. If he only knew what I was choosing not to claim, what evidence I was choosing not to present, he might have advised Kevin to express more gratitude for his unexpected good fortune. "Mr. Thompson, do you have any objections to these terms?" Judge Ramirez asked. Kevin cleared his throat nervously. "No, Your Honor. The terms are acceptable." His voice was barely audible, carrying none of the confident authority that had once attracted me to him at that charity fundraiser 4 years earlier. The man I had married was successful, charming, secure in his place in the world. The man sitting across from me looked defeated, diminished by the weight of secrets and consequences he was still struggling to fully comprehend. The judge signed the final decree, officially dissolving our marriage and restoring my legal name to Jessica Martinez. As we filed out of the courtroom, Kevin caught my arm gently, his touch tentative rather than possessive for the first time in months. "Jessica, wait," he said, his voice carrying a note of desperate urgency. "I know I don't have the right to ask this, but could we talk privately for just a few minutes?" I studied his face, noting the dark circles under his eyes, the way his expensive suit hung slightly loose on his frame as if he had lost weight from stress. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him in the courthouse cafe. Curiosity, overcoming caution about extending our interaction beyond what was legally necessary. We sat across from each other at a small table near the windows, surrounded by the quiet conversations of other people navigating their own legal challenges. Kevin stared into his coffee cup for several minutes, before finally looking up to meet my eyes directly. "I've been thinking about what you said that night. About me loving a version of you that I tried to create rather than accepting who you actually were," he began slowly. "I think you were right about that. I thought I could shape our marriage into something that fit my family's expectations without really considering what you wanted or needed." I waited for him to continue, recognizing this as either a genuine moment of self-reflection or a carefully orchestrated attempt to manipulate my emotions one final time. With Kevin, it was often difficult to distinguish between authentic vulnerability and strategic performance. "The thing is," he continued, "I'm not sure I know how to have a relationship that isn't based on trying to manage or control the other person. It's how my family operates, how I learned to navigate the world. The idea of being with someone who has their own goals and priorities that might conflict with mine is terrifying." His honesty was unexpected and somewhat touching, though it also confirmed everything I had concluded about our fundamental incompatibility. Kevin had been raised in a family system that treated relationships as power structures rather than partnerships, where love was expressed through manipulation rather than support. "That's something you'll need to figure out if you want to have healthy relationships in the future," I said gently. "But it's not my responsibility to teach you or fix you. That work has to come from you, probably with professional help." He nodded slowly, as if acknowledging a truth he had been avoiding. "The family business is falling apart, you know. Without the extra income from the billing schemes, we can't cover our expenses. Dad's talking about declaring bankruptcy and trying to negotiate with the clients we defrauded, but Brian thinks we should just shut everything down and walk away." I felt a complex mix of emotions hearing about Thompson Construction's collapse. Part of me experienced satisfaction at seeing consequences finally catching up with their criminal behavior. But another part felt genuine sadness for the employees and subcontractors who would lose their jobs and income through no fault of their own. "What are you going to do?" I asked. Kevin's laugh was bitter, completely devoid of humor. "I honestly don't know. I've never had a job outside the family business, never built anything on my own merit. At 32 years old, I'm starting to realize I don't have any marketable skills beyond charm and family connections." It was a devastating self-assessment, but probably accurate. Kevin had been groomed from childhood to inherit a position in the family business rather than develop independent capabilities. Now that the business was collapsing under the weight of its own corruption, he was facing the prospect of building a career from scratch without the safety net he had always taken for granted. "You could go back to school," I suggested. "Get an MBA or develop expertise in legitimate business management. You're intelligent and personable when you're not trying to manipulate people. Those are valuable qualities in the right context." He looked at me with something that might have been gratitude mixed with regret. "You're being generous, considering how I treated you. Most people in your situation would take pleasure in watching my world fall apart." I considered his observation, recognizing the truth in it. I'm not most people, and besides, your suffering doesn't erase my suffering. Watching you struggle doesn't give me back the 3 years I spent trying to earn acceptance from people who were never going to give it. We sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, two people who had once shared a life now acknowledging the finality of their separation. Whatever love had existed between us had been poisoned by deception and manipulation. But perhaps we could part with something approaching mutual respect. "I hope you find happiness," Kevin said finally, standing to leave. "Real happiness with someone who appreciates who you are instead of trying to change you. I hope you figure out who you are when you're not performing for your family," I replied, "and I hope you find the courage to build something honest, even if it's harder than taking shortcuts." As he walked away, I felt a sense of closure that had been absent throughout the legal proceedings. The marriage was over, not just legally, but emotionally. The final threads of connection severed by honest conversation rather than angry recrimination. I returned to my office that afternoon to find a congratulations card from my team and a bottle of champagne from my supervisor, along with news that made the entire day feel like a celebration of new beginnings rather than the end of old mistakes. "We've been selected to lead the financial analysis for the Morrison Industries acquisition," my supervisor explained, referencing a deal that would position our firm as a major player in corporate restructuring throughout the Mountain West region. "It's a 2-year project with potential for significant expansion if we handle it well. I can't think of anyone better suited to head up the team." The Morrison Industries project represented everything I had been working toward professionally: complex financial analysis, high-stakes negotiations, and the opportunity to demonstrate expertise that would establish my reputation independent of any personal connections or family relationships. It was also based primarily in San Francisco, which would allow me to relocate if I chose to start fresh in a city where the Thompson name carried no weight or influence. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into the project with an enthusiasm that reminded me why I had chosen finance as a career in the first place. The intellectual challenges, the satisfaction of solving complex problems, the collaborative relationships with clients who valued competence over social connections. This was the world where I belonged, where my worth was measured by results rather than compliance with other people's expectations. The Thompson family drama receded into background noise, occasionally surfacing when legal documents required signatures or when Margaret needed clarification about asset division details. But mostly, they became irrelevant to my daily life. Their attempts at manipulation rendered powerless by my complete emotional disengagement from their approval or disapproval. In March, I received an unexpected visitor at my office. Elena Rodriguez had been my closest friend during graduate school, a brilliant woman who had built her own financial consulting firm in Phoenix and was now expanding into the Denver market. She arrived unannounced on a Thursday afternoon, her presence filling my office with the energy and warmth that had made our friendship such a source of strength during the challenging years of academic competition and career building. "I heard through the business network grapevine that Jessica Martinez was back on the market, professionally speaking," Elena said, settling into the chair across from my desk with the comfortable familiarity of someone who had known me before. Marriage and social climbing had complicated my identity. "I have a proposition that might interest you." Elena's firm specialized in helping mid-sized companies navigate financial restructuring and operational efficiency improvements. Exactly the kind of work that appealed to my analytical strengths and ethical standards. She was looking for a partner to head her Denver office, someone with established client relationships and a reputation for discretion and competence. "The timing is perfect," she explained. "I've been wanting to expand into Colorado for 2 years, but I needed the right person to make it work. Someone who understands the local business culture, but isn't so embedded in the old boy networks that they can't think independently." The offer was tempting on multiple levels. Partnership in an established firm would provide financial security, while allowing me to maintain the professional autonomy I had fought so hard to protect. Working with Elena would restore the collaborative relationships that had been missing from my recent corporate experience. And building something new would represent a clean break from all the Denver connections that carried residual complications from my marriage and divorce. "What kind of timeline are you thinking about?" I asked, already mentally calculating the logistics of transitioning clients and relocating to a new position. 6 months to get the office established and operational," Elena replied. 12 months to demonstrate viability and start turning a profit. After that, we evaluate expansion opportunities and long-term strategic goals. It was an aggressive timeline, but achievable with the right resources and commitment. More importantly, it would provide structure and purpose for the next phase of my life, giving me concrete goals to work toward rather than simply recovering from the wreckage of my marriage. We spent 2 hours discussing details and possibilities, mapping out potential client bases and competitive advantages. identifying the regulatory requirements and professional certifications needed to establish the new office. By the end of our conversation, I felt more excited about the future than I had in years. That evening, I called my parents to share the news about both the divorce finalization and Elena's job offer. My mother's relief was audible even through the phone connection, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone whose instincts had been vindicated by subsequent events. "I never trusted that family," she admitted, abandoning the diplomatic neutrality she had maintained throughout my marriage. "They were too polite, too careful about what they said around us. People who are genuinely welcoming don't need to work so hard at it." My father was more direct in his approval. "That boy never deserved you, Mija. He had everything handed to him and still couldn't appreciate what he had. You're better off without people who don't value your strength." Their support meant more to me than I had realized it would. For 3 years, I had been trying to earn acceptance from people who saw my background as something to be overcome, rather than appreciated. Returning to the unconditional love and respect of my own family felt like coming home after a long journey through hostile territory. My sister Maria was characteristically blunt in her assessment of the situation. "I'm just glad you finally dumped that pretentious family. Kevin seemed nice enough, but his mother always looked at you like you were some kind of charity case she was graciously tolerating." It was an accurate observation that I had been too invested in the relationship to acknowledge at the time. Carol's charity board demeanor had extended to her treatment of me, offering polite acceptance while maintaining emotional distance and subtle superiority. In April, I made the decision to accept Elena's partnership offer and begin the process of transitioning to the new firm. The Morrison Industries project was winding down successfully, establishing my credentials for handling complex corporate restructuring cases. My supervisor was disappointed to lose me, but understood the appeal of partnership over employee status and agreed to serve as a reference for future client development. The logistics of changing careers proved less complicated than I had anticipated. Financial consulting was portable in ways that many professions weren't, dependent on expertise and reputation rather than physical location or institutional affiliations. My client relationships were based on trust and results, qualities that would transfer seamlessly to a new firm structure. The emotional logistics proved more complex. Leaving Denver meant abandoning the life I had tried to build with Kevin, acknowledging that our marriage had been a failed experiment rather than a temporary setback to be overcome through persistence and compromise. It meant starting over in a new city, rebuilding social connections and professional networks from scratch. But it also meant freedom from the constant reminders of manipulation and betrayal, the ability to establish new relationships based on honesty rather than performance. Phoenix offered climate and cultural changes that would reinforce the psychological, fresh start I was seeking. In May, I received a call from an unexpected source. Vanessa Hughes, Kevin's college girlfriend who had briefly resurfaced during our marriage, contacted me through my office number with what she described as an urgent personal matter. "I know this is awkward," she said, her voice carrying a nervousness that suggested she had rehearsed this conversation multiple times. "But I felt like I owed you an explanation about what happened between Kevin and me last year." I almost hung up, recognizing that this conversation could serve no constructive purpose regardless of what revelations it might contain. Kevin's infidelity was history, legally and emotionally resolved through our divorce proceedings. Whatever guilt or compulsion drove Vanessa to contact me was her problem to resolve, not mine to facilitate. But curiosity won out over wisdom, and I agreed to meet her for coffee at a neutral location downtown. She arrived precisely on time, looking polished and successful in the way that came from years of professional achievement and financial independence. Whatever relationship she'd had with Kevin hadn't been motivated by economic desperation or social climbing. "I want you to know that I never intended to interfere with your marriage," she began immediately, as if getting the words out quickly would minimize their impact. "Kevin contacted me last spring, claiming that you two were having serious problems and considering separation. He made it sound like the marriage was essentially over except for the paperwork. It was a familiar pattern, the kind of selective truth-telling that Kevin had perfected over years of managing complex family dynamics and business relationships. Technically accurate information presented in ways that supported the narrative he wanted others to believe. "When did you realize he was lying?" I asked, genuinely curious about her perspective on Kevin's manipulative abilities. Vanessa's laugh was rueful, tinged with embarrassment and regret. "Not until after you filed for divorce and the timeline became clear. Kevin had been telling me you were planning to leave him for months, but the legal documents showed that you initiated proceedings only after that Thanksgiving incident. Either you're the world's fastest decision-maker, or he was lying about your relationship status." Her analysis was sharp, revealing intelligence and analytical skills that explained her successful career in marketing consulting. She had been manipulated, but she had also figured out the deception independently and taken responsibility for her role in the situation. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I know what it's like to be lied to by someone you trust," she replied. "And because I wanted you to know that Kevin's version of events doesn't match the timeline or the facts. Whatever problems you two had, they weren't because you were already planning to leave him when he and I reconnected." It was an unnecessary conversation in many ways, confirming information I had already deduced and providing closure I didn't particularly need. But it also demonstrated something important about character and personal integrity. Vanessa could have simply disappeared from the situation, avoiding awkward conversations and potential confrontations. Instead, she had chosen to take responsibility for her actions and provide information that might help me understand the broader pattern of Kevin's deception. "I appreciate you reaching out," I said honestly. "It takes courage to have conversations like this, especially when you don't owe explanations to the people who were hurt by your choices." She nodded, looking relieved to have discharged what had apparently been weighing on her conscience for months. "Kevin and I aren't together anymore, by the way. Once I realized how extensively he had lied about your marriage, I started questioning everything else he had told me. It turned out there were quite a few discrepancies between his version of events and demonstrable reality." We parted amicably, two women who had been manipulated by the same person finding common ground in our shared recognition of his character flaws. It wasn't friendship exactly, but it was mutual respect based on honesty and accountability. In June, I closed on the sale of my Denver townhouse and completed the relocation to Phoenix. Elena had secured office space in the Camelback Corridor, a prestigious business district that would position our firm for growth while providing access to the kind of sophisticated clients who valued expertise over family connections. My new apartment was a modern high-rise unit with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the desert mountains that reminded me daily of the dramatic changes I had made in my life. No shared mortgage, no joint bank accounts, no family dinner obligations, or social expectations to navigate. Just clean lines, efficient systems, and the peaceful satisfaction of controlling every aspect of my environment. The Rodriguez and Martinez Financial Consulting Group opened officially in July with a client reception that attracted more than 100 local business leaders. Elena's reputation and connections had generated significant interest in our services, while my experience with complex corporate restructuring provided immediate credibility for high-stakes projects. Our first major client was a family-owned construction company facing cash flow problems and regulatory challenges, a situation that initially made me hesitant due to obvious parallels with Thompson Construction. But Elena convinced me that every case was an opportunity to apply ethical expertise to legitimate business problems, and that my specialized knowledge could help honest companies avoid the mistakes that had destroyed Kevin's family business. The Hendricks Construction Project became a model for our firm's approach to client relationships: comprehensive analysis, transparent communication, and solutions designed to strengthen rather than manipulate financial reporting. Within 6 months, we had helped them restructure their debt obligations, improve their bidding processes, and establish internal controls that protected against the kind of fraud that had tempted the Thompson family. In August, I received a letter from Brian Thompson, forwarded from my old Denver address to my new Phoenix office. The envelope was hand-addressed in careful script, suggesting personal rather than legal correspondence. Inside was a 3-page letter written on Thompson Construction letterhead, though the company name had been crossed out and replaced with former Thompson Construction employee in Brian's handwriting. The letter was an apology, but also something more complex. A confession, an explanation, and a request for forgiveness that revealed how completely their family business had collapsed. Brian wrote about the bankruptcy proceedings that had consumed the first half of the year, the civil lawsuits from defrauded clients, and the criminal charges that had ultimately been filed against Frank and himself, despite my continued silence. About what I had discovered. Apparently, one of their clients had conducted an independent audit that revealed the same billing irregularities I had identified, triggering a federal investigation that uncovered years of systematic fraud. "I know you kept your word about not reporting what you knew," Brian wrote. "The FBI agents who interviewed me never mentioned your name or indicated they had received information from internal family sources. You protected us even though we didn't deserve protection, and I want you to know that I recognize the generosity in that choice." He went on to describe the dissolution of the family business and the personal consequences each family member was facing. Frank had been sentenced to 3 years in federal prison for mail fraud and tax evasion. Brian himself had received 2 years of house arrest and substantial financial penalties that would require years to satisfy. Kevin had avoided criminal charges by cooperating with investigators and agreeing to testify against his father and brother, but the betrayal had effectively ended his relationships with most of his extended family. "The hardest part," Brian Doe continued, "has been explaining to my children why their grandfather is in prison and why we had to sell our house and move to a smaller apartment. How do you tell a 6-year-old that the money that paid for their toys and vacations was stolen from other people? How do you rebuild trust when your own family's foundation was built on lies?" The letter concluded with what seemed like a genuine expression of remorse and responsibility, acknowledging that their treatment of me had been motivated by fear and self-interest rather than family loyalty or legitimate business concerns. "You deserved honesty from the beginning," he wrote. "If we had treated you as a family member instead of a threat, if we had asked for your help instead of trying to manipulate you into silence, maybe we could have found legal solutions to our financial problems. Instead, we chose deception and crime, and we're all paying the consequences for those choices." I read the letter twice, trying to process the complex emotions it triggered. Satisfaction at seeing justice served, sadness for the innocent family members caught in the consequences of their relatives' choices, and a strange sense of vindication that my assessment of their character had proved accurate. But mostly, I felt grateful for the distance I had put between myself and their dysfunction. Phoenix was 2 states and a completely different life away from the wreckage of Thompson Construction. I had built something clean and honest and successful, something that belonged to me entirely rather than depending on other people's approval or criminal activity. In September, Elena and I celebrated our first quarterly profit report and began planning expansion into Tucson and Albuquerque. The firm was exceeding our most optimistic projections, attracting clients who valued ethical financial consulting and transparent business practices. My reputation was being rebuilt on my own terms, based on competence and integrity, rather than family connections or social manipulation. That same month, I met David Castillo at a professional networking event sponsored by the Arizona Society of CPAs. David was a forensic accountant who specialized in fraud investigation and prevention, someone whose career was built on protecting honest businesses from the kind of criminal activity that had destroyed the Thompson family. Our initial conversation was purely professional, comparing notes about industry trends and regulatory changes affecting financial consulting. But over coffee the following week, we discovered shared values about business ethics and personal integrity that formed the foundation for what would become a genuine friendship, and eventually, something deeper. David's approach to relationships was refreshingly direct and honest. He asked questions about my background and experiences without making assumptions about my motivations or priorities. He listened to my career goals and offered thoughtful insights without trying to redirect my ambitions toward his own preferences. Most importantly, he seemed genuinely interested in who I was, rather than who he thought I should become. "I have to admit," he said during our third dinner together, "I was a little intimidated when Elena first introduced us. Your reputation for handling complex corporate restructuring is pretty impressive for someone who's still in their 20s. I appreciated his honesty about feeling intimidated, recognizing it as a sign of emotional maturity rather than insecurity. Kevin had never admitted to feeling threatened by my professional success, instead expressing his discomfort through manipulation and control rather than direct communication. "Most men are intimidated by successful women," I replied. "The question is whether they handle that intimidation by trying to diminish the woman's success or by examining their own insecurities." David nodded thoughtfully. "I'd rather examine my insecurities. They're probably telling me something important about my own priorities and goals." It was exactly the kind of self-awareness and emotional intelligence that had been missing from my marriage with Kevin. David understood that relationships required two complete individuals choosing to build something together, rather than one person trying to reshape the other into a more comfortable companion. In October, I received an invitation that surprised me: a wedding announcement from Kevin and Vanessa, scheduled for a small ceremony in early December. The invitation was addressed to Jessica Martinez rather than my married name, suggesting that Kevin was aware of my divorce and name change, but still felt compelled to include me in this significant life event. I almost discarded the invitation immediately, recognizing it as either a misguided attempt at closure or a passive-aggressive gesture designed to demonstrate that he had moved on successfully despite our divorce. But something about the timing and tone made me reconsider what message Kevin might be trying to send. The invitation was simple and elegant, suggesting a ceremony focused on genuine commitment rather than social display. The location was a small chapel in Boulder, rather than the grand venues typically favored by Thompson family events. Most tellingly, the guest list appeared to be limited to immediate family and close friends, excluding the extended social networks that had characterized our own wedding. I decided to respond with a brief congratulations note, acknowledging the invitation while politely declining to attend. It seemed like the appropriate gesture for someone who wished Kevin well in his new relationship while maintaining appropriate boundaries about our past connection. "I hope you and Vanessa find the happiness and honesty that we weren't able to build together," I wrote. "Thank you for including me in this important moment, though I think it's best for everyone if I celebrate your new beginning from a distance." His response arrived 2 weeks later, a handwritten note that revealed more emotional growth than I had expected from someone who had seemed so trapped in his family's dysfunctional patterns. "Thank you for your gracious response," Kevin wrote. "I know I don't deserve your good wishes given how our marriage ended, but I'm grateful for them anyway. Vanessa and I have spent a lot of time talking about the mistakes I made with you, and I'm trying to learn how to be a better partner by being more honest about my fears and insecurities instead of trying to control situations I'm uncomfortable with." The note went on to acknowledge specific ways he had manipulated our relationship and express genuine remorse for the pain his choices had caused. It wasn't a request for forgiveness or reconciliation, just an honest accounting of personal responsibility that suggested real self-reflection and growth. "I hope Phoenix is everything you wanted it to be," he concluded. "You deserved so much better than what my family and I offered you, and I'm glad you had the strength to demand better for yourself." Reading Kevin's note, I felt something shift inside me, a final release of anger and resentment that I hadn't even realized I was still carrying. Not because his apology excused his behavior or erased the damage he had caused, but because it confirmed that leaving him had been the right choice for both of us. Kevin needed to learn how to have honest relationships without the safety net of family wealth and social connections. I needed to build a life based on my own values and priorities without compromise or manipulation. We had been fundamentally incompatible, not because either of us was a bad person, but because we had wanted different things and lacked the emotional skills to navigate those differences constructively. In November, David and I took a weekend trip to Sedona, ostensibly to attend a conference on forensic accounting techniques, but really to spend uninterrupted time together away from work obligations and professional networking. The Red Rock landscape provided a dramatic backdrop for conversations about our respective goals and expectations for the future. "I want to make sure we're building something real," David said as we hiked through Bell Rock Pathway, the November air crisp and clear around us. Not just a convenient professional partnership or a comfortable social arrangement, but an actual relationship based on mutual respect and genuine affection. His directness was both refreshing and slightly intimidating, requiring me to examine my own motivations and fears about entering a new romantic relationship so soon after the trauma of divorce. Part of me wanted to maintain the independence I had fought so hard to achieve, the freedom to make decisions based purely on my own preferences without considering someone else's expectations or needs. But another part of me recognized that David represented something Kevin had never offered: the possibility of partnership without manipulation, love without control, shared goals without sacrificed autonomy. He wasn't trying to reshape me into a more convenient version of myself, and he wasn't threatened by my professional success or personal strength. "I want something real too," I admitted, stopping to face him directly. "But I need you to understand that I'm not willing to compromise my career or my independence for the sake of relationship harmony. I tried that before, and it nearly destroyed me." David's smile was understanding rather than dismissive, acknowledging the legitimate concerns behind my conditions. "I wouldn't want you to compromise those things. They're part of what makes you who you are, and I fell for who you are, not some hypothetical version of you that might be easier to date." It was exactly the response I needed to hear, confirming that he understood the fundamental difference between supporting someone's goals and trying to redirect them toward more convenient alternatives. In December, Elena and I opened our second office in Tucson, expanding our client base to include several major corporations relocating operations to Arizona's business-friendly regulatory environment. The growth validated our decision to focus on ethical consulting and transparent business practices, proving that there was strong demand for financial services that prioritized client success over short-term profits. My personal life was stabilizing as well, with David becoming an increasingly important part of my social and emotional support system. He attended firm events as my guest, meeting Elena and my other professional contacts with the kind of genuine interest and respect that made integration feel natural rather than forced. Most importantly, he never tried to insert himself into my business decisions or offer unsolicited advice about client relationships and strategic planning. He understood that my expertise was valuable and that my professional judgment didn't require external validation or oversight. The year ended with our firm being recognized by Arizona Business Magazine as one of the state's fastest-growing consulting practices, an achievement that felt especially meaningful because it was based entirely on merit and client satisfaction rather than family connections or social manipulation. Standing in our Phoenix office on New Year's Eve, looking out at the desert city that had become my new home, I reflected on the dramatic changes that had transformed my life over the previous 12 months. A year ago, I had been trapped in a marriage built on deception, pressured to abandon my career by people who saw my success as a threat to their criminal enterprise. Now I was a business owner building something meaningful and honest, in a relationship with someone who celebrated my achievements rather than trying to diminish them, living in a place where my worth was measured by competence rather than compliance with other people's expectations. The broken phone from that Thanksgiving dinner had represented the end of one chapter, but also the beginning of something much better. Kevin's violent outburst had shattered more than just the device screen. It had shattered the illusion that I could find happiness by trying to earn acceptance from people who were fundamentally opposed to my success and independence. Elena appeared beside me with 2 glasses of champagne, her presence a reminder of the friendships and professional relationships that had sustained me through the difficult transition from Denver to Phoenix. "To new beginnings," she said, raising her glass in a toast. "To choosing yourself," I replied, thinking about all the women who might be sitting at family dinner tables right now, enduring subtle manipulation and overt pressure to make themselves smaller for the comfort of others. The fireworks outside our window painted the desert sky in brilliant colors, each explosion representing possibility and transformation, and the infinite potential that comes from finally claiming your own life. I had learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from people who can't love you for who you actually are. As the clock struck midnight, I felt nothing but gratitude for the broken phone that had forced me to choose between comfortable lies and difficult truths. The truth had set me free in ways I never could have imagined while I was still trapped in the performance of being someone else's version of a perfect wife. 2 years later, I would receive a package with no return address containing a newspaper clipping about Thompson Construction's former executives being released from federal prison. Attached was a brief note from Amanda, now divorced herself and working as a teacher again, thanking me for showing her family what real strength looked like under pressure. But that night, standing in my own office in my chosen city with my chosen partner celebrating the success I had built through my own efforts, I wasn't thinking about the Thompson family at all. I was thinking about the future I was creating, one honest choice at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.